No, we really want to do this. So, in a startling change of events, hitherto untouchable figure Joanie Lamb has just lost it all in Christian media. Unexpectedly, her kingdom collapsed, abandoning her devoted fan base and party insiders completely taken aback. Joni was a symbol of strength, influence, and religion for a long time. Everything she had worked so hard to establish has now crumbled. What transpired when no one was looking? At long last, the reality, finally making itself known, and the impact is greater than anybody had anticipated. This is just the start, so be sure to tune in. Faith, love, and unity were the foundation of Joanie Lamb's empire, but now she sees it erode away. She was Dyer's reliable public face for a long time. A leader whose poise and power moved millions. Many looked to her, tuned into her presentations, and took her advice to heart. Things have changed, though. There is a noticeable change in the warmth in her voice. Feelings of joy radiate from her. Diminished, and the assurance that she formerly displayed has diminished. It's difficult to deny that something is amiss. A short time ago, Joni was very much in the spotlight. Daystar was under her control, and she was hosting her events, going on private jet adventures, and appearing on TV shows. Her position in the Christian media world was cemented. It was all hers. Highly esteemed and regarded as an inspiration to many. But that seems like it was only yesterday. Something has changed. It doesn't add up. Relying on the knowledge that, no matter how difficult things are right now, we know that God is with us and that He has a higher plan for Dyer. Despite how horrible this attack is, I know that we are not fighting against real people. Dr. Dog Weiss and Joni were married less than 2 years after Marcus Lamb passed away. The critical moment. Nobody was surprised, even her legion of admirers. Anyone who has followed her for any length of time was taken aback by it. There was bewilderment and wrath caused by her new romance. After losing her husband Marcus, people couldn't fathom how she could get over it so fast. A representation of Dyer and the individual responsible for the network's initial development. In respect for Marcus's memory, many thought Joni would need more time to grieve. She proceeded with Doug instead. Rumors of treachery and alienation followed that choice. Joni's hasty marriage wasn't merely an individual decision. The consequences were substantial. Effects on Dyer. Jonathan, her son, who had been her rock throughout her life, now appeared distant. He felt that Marcus was taking his position after they had worked together on Dyer's goal. Doug Weiss, who was formerly unaffiliated with, sitting at the table now, the Lamb family was stealing the show. It was soon apparent that Doug was more than just Joni's husband. His presence was palpable. He was rising through the ranks of Dyer's leadership. Many fans started to wonder if this concerning love, or did it concern authority? Is Doug attempting to seize control in an effort to erase Marcus's legacy? Dyer started to lose interest in Joni's previous audience as he started focusing on Doug and his idea. Donors, fans, and even pastors who had been there for the network for a long time. People began to pull away. Dyer's once welcoming warmth had been replaced by an icy, businesslike vibe. There was an increasing lack of light in the comment section of Joni's writings, and the ministry became increasingly silent. No longer did people feel connected. Dear Dyer was not in the mood to be Dyer. Cracks appeared despite Joni's best efforts to maintain a smile. There had already been a toll from the decision to marry Doug and the changes at Dyer. As her subjects lost faith in and affection for her, her empire began to fall apart. Began to disappear. The disappearance of the woman they had come to trust and the subsequent uncertainties surrounding her return to Dyer's ministry left fans wondering what had transpired. The rift in Joanie Lamb and Dyer's families that has shaken them began as a little, nearly invisible crack. However, it was soon something that couldn't be ignored. A seemingly insignificant decision became the tipping point that caused the togetherness of the Lamb family to crumble. The choice was Dr. Doug Weiss's marriage to Joni, which took place only 2 years after her husband Marcus passed away. Many saw this as the first step in a chain reaction that eventually drove a wedge within the family. Collaboratively, Joni and Marcus had constructed Dyer. A network wasn't all it was. Their legacy is this. over the course of several years. The very essence of Dyer, faith, family, and unity, was embodied by them. They had a common goal for the ministry, work together, and preach together. Marcus was the one who really made Dyer take off. But Joni was there for him, a rock who encouraged him and helped make their dream a reality. Working in tandem, they created Extraordinary, a venue that brought hope to millions and changed people's lives. However, everything changed when Marcus abruptly passed away. After losing her long-term companion, Joni's sadness was understandable. All of the supporters, the ministry staff, and it was expected that Joni would weep and contemplate her life with Marcus and the legacy they had created together, according to her family. The reality, however, was quite different from everyone's expectations. Quickly, Joni moved forward, rather than lingering in grief. Joni remarried barely 2 years following Marcus's passing. And not only that, she wed Doug Weiss, a stranger to both the Lambs and Dyer, who had no ties to either family. This marked a turning moment for a lot of people. It was shocking for Joni's family as well as her followers that she decided to tie the knot so soon after Marcus' death. Jonathan, her son, was shaken to his core because he had worked with Marcus for so long and believed in Dyer's potential. Not only was Jonathan's father being supplanted in Joni's heart, but he also believed it was happening in the ministry that Marcus had established. Weiss was more than simply Joni's new spouse. Within Dyer, he was emerging as a new leader, someone whose influence appeared to eclipse Marcus's legacy. The schism started there. The bond between Jonathan and his father had never wavered. He held Marcus in high regard, respected him, and labored beside him. They had a close relationship, and Jonathan was considered Marcus's rightful successor. Over the years, he had hosted, preached, and helped run Dyer as part of his ministry. However, all of a sudden, things were shifting. Douglas Weiss, who was limited to newcomer, was now playing a more significant role in the ministry. On air, he was shown advising Joni, preaching, and even stepping into Marcus's shoes. Jonathan found it challenging to observe. His mother wasn't the only one filling in for Joni. Covering is a very meaningful word in Christian communities. It's a position of spiritual leadership and power. It seemed like a betrayal of Marcus' legacy to many when Doug was referred to as Joni's cover. Jonathan initially remained silent. He distanced himself, quit going to the shows, and started to fade out of the limelight. People started to take note of him while he remained silent. They began to inquire. For what reason was Jonathan silent? For what reason wasn't he rooting for his mom to get married? Why hadn't he shown the appropriate level of celebration for her new relationship? There was mounting friction behind the scenes. The family was deeply divided over Johnny's choice to marry Doug Weiss. Despite his unwavering loyalty throughout his childhood, Jonathan now felt torn between embracing his mother's new life and preserving his father's legacy. The situation became even more dire as Doug started to exert greater authority. For Joni, he was more than just a husband. He began to behave as though he could influence Dyer's decisions. He took the initiative to make decisions, propose new ideas, and advocate for the network to expand its programming, add counseling content, and change its course. Marcus had different plans for Dyer. It seems like Doug's plans ran counter to the ministry's initial objective. Also, Jonathan couldn't sit on his hands and let it happen because of his long history of involvement with the ministry. But it seemed like Joni was stifling his voice anytime he attempted to speak up. Despite warnings from everyone around her, Joni began to protect Doug out of her love for him. Were becoming a major problem. For Dyer, this was the beginning of a new chapter, and she thought Doug was a divine messenger. In the wake of Marcus's passing, she looked to Doug as a compass for the future of the ministry. It seemed like everything was being snatched from Jonathan. He had surplus to his needs. He felt forsaken and unappreciated. The gap between the relatives widened over time. Jonathan began to disappear from all big occasions. Neither he nor his mother watched her programs. He was gone from Dyer's public view. His silence just served to fuel the rumors as others started to realize he wasn't around. How come Jonathan was absent? Was he furious? Is he injured? Joni made an effort to pretend it didn't matter and brush it aside. However, when no one was looking, the family was falling apart. Unity, such as gatherings for prayer or family conversations, had vanished. On the contrary, a covert conflict was intensifying. A feud between a mother who was fighting for her new spouse and a son who was doing his best to preserve the name and work of his late father. The change was also noted by a few Dyer employees. The network's origins were questioned, Jonathan was rumored to have been ousted, and Doug's power was said to be on the rise. There was a rift in the family. While what seemed like a family ministry turned out to be more of a business. Joni was the focal point of it all. Feeling conflicted about her feelings for her new husband and her devotion to her late husband's legacy. Joni and Jonathan weren't the only ones who felt the rift. All over the ministry, people could feel it. Distancing themselves was the first move by fans, contributors, and pastors. Fans who had been watching for a while stopped. Unwilling to keep funding a ministry that was no longer relevant, some even subtly withdrew their support. Felt authentic. Once a symbol of unity and hope, Dyer had become a hotbed of strife and chaos. Joni, nevertheless, appeared either unable or unwilling to slow down at any point throughout the ordeal. She maintained her positive demeanor, posted more and more images of herself and Doug smiling, and delivered a image of tranquility. The family split that started with a single choice continued even though her very foundation was giving way. A full-blown fissure had sprung up due to the choice to marry Doug Weiss. Mother Joni's son passed away. Unity departed her family. The show's identity crumbled, leaving longtime fans bewildered and devastated as they watched in bewilderment. They used to believe in a family. What became of them? Who was this remarkable woman whose religion and leadership had touched their hearts? None of the possible solutions were located, and the stillness became increasingly deafening as time went on. The harm was done, and the rift was too deep to be repaired. The change in Dyer began gently, like a wind shift that went unnoticed until it was too late. For a long time, Dyer was a shining example, a sanctuary where people may discover hope, religion, and camaraderie. The foundation of the network was laid by Joanie Lamb and her late husband Marcus. It was more than just a TV channel. Their family and faith came together in a ministry, served as the basis. But gradually, a new sensation emerged. A chillier, more calculating air crept in, replacing the values upon which Dyer had been founded. A less than ideal beginning occurred when Joni remarried Dr. Doug Weiss. More than 2 years subsequent to Marcus' untimely demise. The change started here for many. Many were taken aback by Joni's new relationship. Her longtime friends and acquaintances were perplexed. And some of them got harmed. Hey Marcus. She represented Dyer and was the ministry's beating heart. He had dedicated his entire life to creating the network. It seems that his legacy was now being disregarded. Doug's and Joni's wedding plans. A short time later, some people felt betrayed by Marcus's death. The focus shifted from the wedding itself to the events that transpired thereafter. Something changed when Joni wed Doug. To Doug, Dyer was more than just a guest spot. He was more than just Joni's ally. He rose to prominence in the network very rapidly. From sitting next to her to preaching with her, he began to appear on her shows. There was little delay in introducing Doug as Joni's cover. Covering means something very specific to Christians. Suggests having spiritual power, being protected, and being guided. For many, referring to Doug as her covering made it seem as though he was taking Marcus's place, both emotionally and in Dyer's leadership. Viewers were silent at first. They thought what was important was that Joni was pleased. But eventually, fissures began to show. Jonathan, who was Joni's son, started acting distantly. Working alongside his father and hosting concerts, he had long been a part of Dyer. Jonathan, though, became more reserved following Doug's arrival. He became less visible on television and he ceased going to big events. As word got out, fans started to take note and wonder, Jonathan, where were you? He should have been rejoicing in his mother's nuptials. For what reason did it seem as though something was absent? Things were happening in the background. Far worse. There had been harmony in the Lamb household, but suddenly there was strife. After years of working side by side with Marcus, Jonathan began to worry that his father's name was being wiped off the map. With his increasing role in decision-making, counseling, and even preaching, Doug Weiss was rising to prominence in Dyer. In contrast, Jonathan was being shoved aside. Uncertain of how to cope, he thought his ministry function was being eroded. He attempted to raise his voice, but Joni didn't appear to be paying attention. Doug had won her heart, and she had complete faith in him. She thought Doug was a divine messenger sent to Dyer to lead her into the future. However, Jonathan perceived the destruction of all that his father had worked for as a personal attack. It became easier to see the changes as time passed. A more assertive role for Doug in guiding Dyer's actions began to emerge. His role has expanded beyond that of Joni's husband. He pretended to be the newly appointed minister. He had major ideas of his own, and Marcus's plans for Dyer didn't always mesh with them. He advocated shifting the spotlight away from Dyer's distinctive qualities and onto his own brand while simultaneously increasing the amount of counseling content. When he constructed the network, Marcus didn't envision this happening. Doug had a different perspective, one that was more concerned with branding and growth, with less emphasis on religion and charity. Unease began to creep into the lives of a few Dyer employees. Longtime employees of the Lamb family started to go. Some subtly left, while others were forcibly removed. Rumors of dissatisfaction with workers are being instructed to shift their attention away from the fundamental principles that had established Dyer. Many were unhappy with the direction the ministry was taking after it had been run like a company. Even Jonathan was burdened by the change. He ceased tuning in to the shows. He withdrew from social media altogether. He withdrew from the activities that had constituted his existence before. Those who had come to adore Jonathan as a Dyer family member began to question his absence. They were conflicted when they noticed Doug stealing the show. Witnessing Joni's will to go forward following Marcus's death was one thing, but witnessing her new spouse rise to such prominence in the ministry was an entirely different ballgame. The fans were quick to note the improvements made to Dyer. Contributions started to decline. There was a decline in viewers. No one knew what the ministry was doing, and confusion reigned. Dyer used to be a home away from home, a place where people could come to relax and feel connected with others. At this point, though, it seemed more like a commercial enterprise. The once warm glow that emanated from something chillier and more distant appeared to have taken the place of the Lamb family. Optimistic and smiling, Joni persisted in sharing photos of herself and Doug online. However, there was a noticeable shift in tone in the comments section of her posts. Supporters who were those who had previously backed her were now casting doubt on her choices. They were perplexed as to her rapid transition, her marriage to Doug, and her failure to pay proper tribute to Marcus' legacy. Joni, however, remained silent. Time and again, she shared photos from her life online, keeping a straight face and acting as if everything was okay. The reality was that nothing was all right. Bad things were happening to Dyer as he changed. Once a guiding light of faith and family, the network was now floundering. The once strong bond within the Lamb family was beginning to fray. While Joni was engrossed in her new marriage, Jonathan was growing distant. There had been a change at Dyer, the ministry that had touched the lives of many. A change was taking place, and no one could intervene to prevent it. Throughout it all, viewers were left with unanswered questions. They sought clarification. The fate of the family they had put their faith in remained a mystery to them. Their goal was to understand why the ministry they had long supported was crumbling. Unfortunately, Joni was not providing any responses. She was preoccupied with Doug and Dyer's new course of action. Marcus Lamb's dominion appeared to be in freefall, with no one prepared to intervene. A lot of people didn't pay much attention to the gradual decline of Dyer at first. The network had stood for togetherness, family, and faith for a long time. After losing her husband Marcus, Joanie Lamb toiled away at Dyer's foundation. A television network wasn't all it was. It served as a ministry, a haven where people may experience faith, hope, and a sense of belonging to a bigger, more loving family. However, a shift occurred in the past few years. The once warm hospitality of the Lamb family began to wane. Nothing happened in a single day. Neither a shocking scandal nor a precipitous decline into disgrace occurred. No, it was considerably less noisy than that. All that had previously been solid and united began to crumble gradually. The shift towards the moment Joni remarried seemed to have arrived. The timing of the decision further startled many. Her cherished spouse Marcus had recently gone away. Together, they had created Dyer, and the death of him touched millions of viewers. Not only Joni were accustomed to his reliable company. However, everyone was confused about Joni's sudden change in romantic partners after she began dating Dr. Doug Weiss. Some wondered if Joni had ever gotten over her loss of Marcus. The speed with which she moved on made others uneasy. It came as a shock to them because it happened so suddenly. Joni, though, was content. Doug was a blessing from God, and she made it plain to everyone that their romance was a component of his plan for their lives. She expressed her happiness by posting about it on social media and inviting those who follow. However, changes were being made behind the scenes. Dyer, which had previously revolved around the Lamb family, began to have a new vibe. To Joni, Doug was more than simply a new acquaintance. Very soon he was pivotal to the world. It appeared harmless enough at first. On Joni's shows, Doug would sometimes preach alongside her and share anecdotes and words of wisdom. However, that was not all. Gradually, Doug began to shoulder an increasing amount of responsibility. No longer was he an unofficial guest. He was introduced as the person who would cover for Joni. The word covering has deep significance for anyone familiar with the religious society. The term was commonly used to designate a spiritual leader or spouse who offered support and direction. On the other hand, hearing Doug called Joni's, it was awkward, even wrong, to cover up. This new figure seemed to have erased Marcus's memory and taken his place as a legend. Anxieties set in for a few employees and supporters. Had Doug ambitions of becoming Marcus's boss? Was Joni utterly absorbed in her new romance to the point where she was ready to part up her husband's hard-earned wealth? One of the first to withdraw was Jonie Lamb, who was Joni's son. Working alongside Marcus and hosting concerts, he has long been a mainstay at Dyer. Both Jonathan and his father had held each other in high esteem, and they had a strong connection in ministry and life. However, Jonathan began to withdraw once Joni wed Doug. His appearances on television diminished. He ceased showing up at important gatherings. Eventually, he stopped posting at all on social media. The fans took note of the shift. They were concerned about Jonathan's whereabouts and behavior, wondering why he wasn't participating in the festivities surrounding his mother's wedding. Things were even worse behind the scenes. Family members and friends of Jonathan's disclosed that he was distressed by what event was underway. He worried that Dyer was becoming too modern and would eventually eclipse his father.